Los Angeles Times has a cryptic headline on its website. No story, just a headline reading, U.S. learned about alleged extremist links of airline bomber as he was in the air. Don't go there yet. There's no story, but it dovetails with an ABC News report tonight that one of the president's orders in the wake of Detroit will be a surge of U.S. Marshals on board the international flights of American carriers to switch by month's end most or all of the 3,200 members of the force on non-domestic flights, covering their responsibilities on the domestic flights with other federal law enforcement officials, and juxtaposing those two stories is a fascinating exercise. A White House review pinpointing exactly where the intelligence community failed is due out tomorrow. Former CIA Special Agent Jack Rice joins me presently to discuss the actual mechanics of the possibility of agencies withholding intel. The day after the president gave the intelligence community its public drubbing, Umar Farouk Abdulmutallab was indicted on 6 federal charges, including attempted use of a weapon of mass destruction and the attempted murder of the 290 aboard Northwest Flight 253. Today's indictment also says Abdulmutallab had another sensitive explosive on him, the same that convicted shoe bomber Richard Reed carried, known as TATP. Abdulmutallab is currently being held in a Michigan prison with a hearing scheduled on Friday. Meanwhile, the White House will release its review of what went wrong tomorrow, alongside more specific recommendations for improving the current system. We mentioned what one of them is apparently going to be, according to ABC. The president will speak about the problems uncovered in the report. Press Secretary Gibbs giving a grim preview.
This is a failure that touches across the full waterfront of our intelligence agencies.
Complicating security matters, technology intended to catch terrorists when intelligence fails. In England, debate over full-body scanners at airports. Turns out the machines violate, perhaps, child pornography laws. Lawmakers there would have to exempt minors from the scanners or introduce new legislation. Joining me now, as promised, former CIA Special Agent Jack Rice, now the host of Live in Washington on Air America Radio. Jack, good evening.
Great to be with you, Keith.
We'll put together the details of this, what's leaked out about the air marshals in a moment, and the idea that something was found as the flight was in the air on Christmas. But first, about Richard Wolff's suggestion last night that the White House is still examining this prospect that an agency or agencies kept intel out of a system because they had no confidence in the system. What do you think that means practically? You don't file reports, or you're afraid the agency's going to rat out your sources? Walk us through that.
Well, that's the real problem. If we don't actually connect all of, and I hate to come back to this, but connecting all of these dots, if I have an individual dot and I'm concerned that somebody else isn't going to protect my asset, I've just risked my life to get that information, my asset is risking their life, and I simply toss it out there to everybody else, and I doubt that they're actually going to hold on to it and protect it, then I may actually hold back. I mean, this is a perfect example of a system that is fundamentally broken and still broken. We can go back to the beginning of 9/11. We've spent $1 trillion. We've invaded multiple countries. We've killed tens of thousands of people. And the same problem we had then is the same problem we have today. It's a disaster.
All right, but particularly on this, a guy's father walks in and says, my son's been radicalized, he may be a risk to you. How do you keep that quiet? That is, to use the, the John le Carre term, that's gold. How could it possibly be an error of omission? Wouldn't you have to suppress that rather than just lose it somewhere?
Well, I think you're right, and that's really the difficulty here. How do you deal with something like this? And this is part of the problem. President Obama said 2 things. He said that there's a human problem here and there's a systemic problem here. The human problem is not understanding what's going on, but the systemic one, I think, is equally important. It's not just about the inability to distribute information so everybody else can get it. It's also confidence in the individual officer that if it gets out there, it's also going to be protected. We still haven't dealt with that issue, and it's one of the other multiple problems that we have, and this continues again and again.
All right, now we're getting a little clearer picture. The Los Angeles Times report is now up to match its headline, and what it is reporting is that they had just clicked in everything about Abdulmutallab, and that he was to be questioned upon landing in Detroit. That's how close a thing this was. There's an anonymous quote from an law enforcement official. The people in Detroit were prepared to look at him in secondary inspection. The decision had been made. The database had picked up the State Department concern about this guy, that this guy may have been involved with extremist elements in Yemen. They could have made a decision on whether to stop him from getting on the plane. Is it, as Wellington said of Waterloo, that near run a thing? Did we miss this by a matter of 6 hours?
Yeah, that is really the concern with everything on this issue. We now know, as we look back, all of the issues we should have grabbed. I mean, if we want to go down the list, you know, the fact that he was paying cash, the fact that he started from a third country, he was going one way, he was doing only carry-on luggage. I mean, all of these issues should have been enough in itself. But then you find out, of course, about the father who addresses a CIA officer not once, but twice, and then multiple phone calls. You add all of this up, something should have sort of triggered it, but nothing did. And again, part of the systemic problem. To be honest, one of the other issues I'm amazed about, however, is that we seem to have overreacted about so many other things that we were going to do, despite looking at the problem that still exists.
So is there perhaps in this, could this ultimately turn out to be the cheapest test of our system and what needs to be amped up and what can be motored down if we were off by 6 hours? Is this a question of, you know, lifting up a few levels and lowering other ones? Is it tweaking at that point?
Well, I'm pleased that if we can at least address it like that, but we have to narrowly address it. Part of what happens right now here in Washington, especially during an election year, is the GOP will continue to bang on President Obama and say that he's weak on terrorism and ultimately he hates America. And instead, he may overreact. I hope he doesn't. Let's narrowly address the problem and then deal with it.
Jack Rice, formerly of the CIA, now at the Air America radio network, and joining us on this breaking story out of the LA Times. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you.